thank you, Don, for letting us be here. I'm Chris Miller. I live in the 8th District. I've lived in this part of the world for my entire life. I grew up in Holland Hills, spent my boyhood years birding in Dykes Marsh, and moved on to other things. I do a lot of work in Virginia, do a lot of work across the state and also nationally. I had the honor of knowing Don when he was Lieutenant Governor and during his race for governor, and I can assure you that there is no candidate who understands the Commonwealth of Virginia better. He understands land use, he understands transportation, he understands the environment, and he's one of the few politicians I know who've actually hiked the Appalachian Trail. He can practice what he preaches, and it's at a gut level. Don once gave a speech at the Piedmont Environmental Council annual meeting where he expressed his understanding that we can grow as a state, we can grow as a nation without destroying the land and natural resources that we have. And in fact, we have to do more to protect them. Larry Schweiger, who's going to introduce Don, is another old friend and old colleague. Larry and I have worked together for 2 decades, both in his capacity as a director at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, at the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and then later as head of the biggest effort on climate change at the National Wildlife Federation. And I can tell you that Larry knows more about how local, state, national, international things all fit together. So for Larry to be here behind Don is globally significant, and I think a real testament to the concern and the understanding that Don has for what we face as a country in the next few decades. So, Larry Schweiger.
Thank you, Chris. Chris and I have known each other for a very long time, as Chris pointed out, and I want you all to know, just a comment about Chris, that he has, in my mind, one of the most effective land conservation programs in the country. He's done a tremendous job, not just getting easements and protecting lands, but also being involved in the political apparatus of Virginia to ensure that the highways and other projects are really consistent with the overall vision of the region. And it's a real model for the country. And when I was on the advisory board of the National Land Trust Community, I saw that with Chris's work and have long admired his efforts. It's a real privilege for me to be here, Don, with you to support your efforts to become a member of Congress. I have to say that I have watched your career when you were Lieutenant Governor and the great work that you have done for such a long time for this region. And I had an opportunity to visit Don and Megan in Switzerland when they were working there as ambassadors and really doing a great job representing our nation in a wonderful country like Switzerland. But the thing that really impressed me about Don was his extreme knowledge of climate change and its impact on Switzerland, the Swiss Alps, and the impact not just there but around the world. And I learned later of his involvement with the governor and with Governor Kane on the Climate Advisory Committee and his work particularly on transportation. It's a real important issue for me personally. I see the changing climate. We're standing here near waters that are tidal. We sometimes forget that they are tidal waters, but as the climate changes, as the sea level rises, this region is going to be much more vulnerable into the future, and we need to keep that in mind. So the work on climate change is extraordinarily important. And I can tell you, having worked with Congress for more years than I'd like to admit, that we see a real need for leadership in Congress, a leader like Don who understands that we need to work across the aisle, that we need to find collaboration, we need to find solutions to real pressing problems. And we don't have that in Congress right now, to be really honest with you. You know, if you look at what's happened in the House this year, we have retirements of 2 of the most important members with Waxman and also with John Dingell retiring. And so Don needs to be in Congress. We need to help him get there, and I'm really pleased to support his efforts in that direction. So Don, it's with great pleasure I turn it over to you and say best wishes, and I look forward to seeing you in Congress.
Well, thank all of you so very, very much for coming out on this, before the snow comes again, this glorious Saturday morning. Megan and I are thrilled that you're part of our brief announcement. I'm very grateful for Chris's strong endorsement and recommendation. He is a fellow Williams grad, and there's so few of us in Virginia that we have to stick together.
Hey, they're the Final Four down in Fredericksburg.
He pays better attention than I do. And even though neither Chris nor Larry are here in their official capacities, it would be remiss not to talk about how incredible Chris's leadership has been in Northern Virginia and the Virginia Piedmont for decades. He has educated me, led me to a much better understanding. I was just telling him before we started that Megan's and my 4 years in Switzerland was proof of the Chris Miller vision. That if you commit to density and transit, you're going to have a wonderful quality of life and a carbon footprint 1/3 of the United States. With people, the Swiss, by the way, are the #1 train riders in the world, train miles per person per year. And that's because they've adopted land use planning and a commitment to density that Chris has stood for decades, that we haven't quite gotten to yet. But thanks to his leadership, we're getting there little by little. And Chris, thank you very, very much. And Larry, again, no formal titles, but what an incredible leader for generations. And where America is, little by little, understanding about climate change is largely due to Larry's incredible efforts. Millions of people. He just wrote a book on, tell me the title again.
Last Chance.
Last Chance for Earth. And we have this conversation because of Larry Schweiger's leadership. And I'm just very, very grateful. So thank you very much. He came over to Switzerland, by the way, to track the retreat of the glaciers, where some of them were 100 meters per year. They had photos of virtually every glacier that Megan and I went to that showed them in 1990 and showed them in the year 2000. And then you look today and it will be farther. The glacier that was here today would be at the parking lot 10 years ago. You saw in a country that has 80% of their power from hydro and nuclear, their only natural resource is water. The retreat of the glaciers means that water is going away, and their ability to rely on hydropower is quickly going away. So your research is very important, again, for all of us to understand. I feel connected to so many of you here. Megan and I went to COP15 in Denmark in December of 2009 to try to get educated as we could be on climate change. And happily, we're the guests of the ambassador to Denmark, Laurie Fulton. She and the president pulled out COP15 by themselves. So. And Bob Brink, who is a longtime member of the Virginia General Assembly, is also a leader in Virginia and trying to move us forward. Well, thanks all of you for joining me at the river's edge today. The ospreys just returned this last week and they're building nests. I think Glenda Booth is out looking for the ospreys right now. Megan and I are so grateful that we live in Old Town, in an old historic conserved neighborhood, that we have this wonderful national park and Dyke Marsh just a bike ride away. And I want to run for Congress for many reasons. Chief among them is to try to overcome the bitter partisan divisions between Democrat and Republican, left and right. I want to work on the hardest issues that face us: rebuilding our economy and the middle class, income inequality, guns, a woman's right to choose. But my strongest calling is climate change. I want to do everything I can in my lifetime to address this crisis. Today, the planet is changing in dangerous ways. 9 of the 10 warmest years on record have been in this century. 97% of climate change experts say the warming of the Earth is due to human activity, to all the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases we have put into the atmosphere. And if we don't act soon, these same climate change experts say by the end of the century, we will be 6 to 11 degrees warmer in Fahrenheit, which translates into a 3 to 6 foot increase in sea level. Despite this, we don't seem to see an immediate impact of this carbon release. We just had a very cold winter here, and people said, what climate change? But our children and our grandchildren, and many of us standing here today, in just a few years, will pay the price in heat waves, in droughts, in extreme storms, in coastal surges, in food shortages, wildfires, heat-related deaths, ecosystem destructions, mass migrations, and more. This must change. As the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities puts it, it's time to enact a policy that ends the free use of the atmosphere to dispose of pollution. We must act and we must lead. That's why I'm announcing today that I'm in favor of a progressive carbon tax. As a member of policy, I will work to make this U.S. national policy. A carbon tax is simple, efficient, transparent, and a powerful way to use market forces to reduce our greenhouse gases. A carbon tax will demonstrate to the world that the United States takes its responsibility seriously to be a global leader of combating climate change. And this is an especially important message to the growing economies that have the potential for catastrophic increases of fossil fuels in the years ahead. I want to become your congressman so that I can tackle this problem in tandem with the U.S. senators who spent an all-nighter this last week just to dramatize the problem. We know that climate change puts the Chesapeake Bay at much greater risk. Down in Norfolk, the sea level has already risen over 14 inches in the last century. But we must be precise and progressive with a carbon tax policy. I like the model put forward by Senators Sanders and Boxer earlier this year. It sets an initial price of $20 per metric ton of carbon dioxide, and it returns 60% of the revenue to low and middle income households, which is essential, because a new carbon tax must not increase poverty in America or put an undue burden on the households least able to afford it. You know, some of us can buy a new energy efficient refrigerator or a better furnace. Some of us could buy a new car that's more fuel efficient. And many of us live close to public transportation, but we know that not everyone has these options. In a progressive carbon tax plan, we must use some of the revenue to hold harmless those least able to manage transportation and home utility cost increases. There are many ways to do this. Among them, strengthening the safety net, creating a refundable tax credit, or through electronic benefit transfer systems. Good legislation will also devote some of the carbon tax revenues to green energy and energy efficiency measures. It's essential that a progressive carbon tax be a driver of jobs and the economy. Every penny must be raised to achieve the mutually compatible goals of greenhouse gas reductions while increasing the engines of economic growth in America. For example, in solar energy alone, we created 20,000 jobs in America last year. Payroll taxes could be reduced, and our national infrastructure demands robust new investment. A progressive carbon tax is not the only environmental issue that we're working on. At the same time, we have to look in our own neighborhoods. And again, this is the work that Chris and Larry have done so well in the Virginia Piedmont, in Western Pennsylvania, and preserving gorgeous and ecologically critical swaths of our homes. That's why I recently wrote Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack to oppose horizontal drilling for shale gas in the George Washington National Forest. It's why I attended a National Park Service meeting about the restoration of Dyke Marsh right here. And it's why I support Jerry Hyland's opposition to the current plan to extend the contract of the Lorton landfill to 2040. Together, we can work to fight climate change through a carbon tax and to keep our Virginia healthy and beautiful with leaders like Larry Schweiger and Chris Miller. I look forward to this challenge, and I ask you to join me on this journey. Thank you all very, very much.